One of the many great things about art is the ability to endlessly discuss, debate, and dissect it with others, breaking down the wider meaning and getting to the meat of what a given movie is really about. However, while movies are largely subjective and there's rarely a truly objectively correct way to read any given film scene, there are certain perceptions of some horror scenes that have been more or less proven false, sometimes even from the people who made them. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are horror movie scenes everyone always gets wrong. Childs' breath is visible in the final scene, The Thing. As we all know, John Carpenter's The Thing ends on a deliciously ambiguous note. As remaining survivors MacReady and Childs are left to freeze to death, neither sure if the other is in fact The Thing. Many fans, including us, however, have pointed out an apparent clue as to the imposter's true identity in the scene. That being, while MacReady's breath is extremely noticeable in the air, Childs' just isn't. The implication for many is that Childs' apparent lack of actual breathing identifies him as the Thing, which is curious indeed. The thing is though, no pun intended, that this is actually kinda easy to refute if you've got a Blu-ray copy of the movie handy, because the theory evidently emerged from low-resolution VHS and DVD releases of The Thing. On the higher-resolution Blu-ray and streaming releases, Childs' breath is actually faintly noticeable just before he sits down with MacReady, and the lack of much visible vapor in the film's final moments is likely just a technical oversight. He isn't completely sane in the final scene, Shutter Island. The ending to Martin Scorsese's Shutter Island has been widely dissected and discussed over the past decade, though the prevailing sentiment among many is that the final moments allude to Teddy, aka Andrew, actually being sane. After it appears that Andrew has finally broken free of his paranoid insanity following an elaborate exercise concocted by his doctors, he again refers to Dr. Lester Sheehan by his delusional persona of Chuck. But just as it seems that Andrew has slipped back into Teddy mode, he asks Chuck, quote, "What would be worse, to live as a monster or to die as a good man?" This line of dialogue seems to imply that Andrew actually had retained his sanity and simply pretended to have slipped up once again, so that he would be lobotomized and forget every awful thing that had happened. As cut and dry as this sounds though, it's again a little too simple and straightforward, and apparently incorrect, according to the original novel's author, Dennis Lehane. Though Lehane didn't write the movie script, and the movie does admittedly deviate from the novel in a few ways, he did consult on the script and give the production his blessing to include that final quote, which isn't in his original book. He also stated that from his perspective, Teddy/Andrew's moment of clarity was simply a quote, momentary flash, and that he lacked the suicidal tendencies necessary to consciously commit to being lobotomized. Of course, you can still take the ending however you want, that's the beauty of art after all, but it is interesting to note the author's true intentions here. The cause of Adelaide's voice is primarily psychological, not physical. Us. In Jordan Peele's Us, the audience spends most of the movie wondering why Adelaide's doppelganger Red speaks with such an unsettlingly hoarse voice, or really speaks at all, given that her fellow doppelgangers don't possess the ability to say much of anything. It's of course revealed at the film's end that Red was actually the real Adelaide all along, having been attacked, throttled, and forcibly switched with Red in childhood. Though Peele doesn't explain it directly, the implication seems to be that Adelaide's scratchy, croaky voice is the result of physical trauma from being strangled by Red as a little kid. As much as this does seem to track on the surface, the operating cause of her bizarre vocalization actually appears to be psychological in nature. Actress Lupita Nyong'o has stated in interviews that she based Adelaide's voice on Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who suffers from spasmodic dysphonia, a neurological disorder which causes spasms of the larynx and generates hoarse vocalizations as a result. Though research into spasmodic dysphonia continues to this day, it is generally accepted to impact the central nervous system and stem from extreme psychological trauma. It goes without saying that being attacked by a secret underground doppelganger and left for dead would cover this. That's not to say that the strangling didn't have any effect on Adelaide's voice at all, but it seems the overarching cause is psychological and not physical. The "he's killing me" scene is more realistic than you think. Friday the 13th, the final chapter. By far the most memorable death scene in Friday the 13th, the final chapter, is that of poor Rob, who gets trapped by Jason in a basement. As Jason hacks away at him, Rob repeatedly screams, "He's killing me," while Trish Jarvis watches in terror. The scene was instantly infamous and has been wildly mocked by horror fans for its campy absurdity and implied lack of realism. Now, there is nothing wrong with having a laugh at the scene. I mean, it does look daft and funny, but it's actually more rooted in reality than you probably think. In the series' retrospective book, Crystal Lake Memories, director Joseph Zito confirmed that Rob's death was actually influenced by a story he read in a New York newspaper, where a man shouted, "Please stop hurting me, please stop killing me," while being stabbed to death. The director was disturbed enough by the report that he felt it would be perfect for a distinctive, unforgettable Friday the 13th kill, and for better or worse, he was entirely correct. If Rob's surprisingly verbal death might seem unlikely, then it's not actually quite as hilariously implausible as most fans assume. Oskar is a vampire at the end. Let the right one in. Thomas Alfredson's masterful Swedish vampire film concludes with vampire Eli making short, gory work of a group of boys bullying her friend Oskar. In the final scene, Oskar is travelling on a train with Eli in a box when they tap affectionate kisses to one another in Morse code. The bullies are dead and Oskar and Eli get to run away together, implying that Oskar becomes her mortal caretaker for the rest of his life. How sweet. A few years after the movie blew up worldwide, though, the screenwriter and author of the original novel published a short story titled Let the Old Dreams Die, which clarified what the end of the movie actually meant. The story reveals that Oskar was turned into a vampire during their train journey, allowing them to become ageless vampire lovers forevermore. Depending on your perspective, it's either a happier or bleaker outcome for Oskar, but far from what most people believe is going on in that seemingly cute final scene. Rose isn't a clear-cut villain, she's also hypnotized. Probably. Get Out. Jordan Peele's Get Out drops a banger of a reveal when, as Chris attempts to flee the Armitage household with his girlfriend Rose, she suddenly prevents him from leaving. After fumbling around for a while trying to find her car keys, she suddenly pulls them out and her facial expression changes instantly from one of panic to cold indifference. It turns out that Rose was in on it the whole time. Or was she? A fan theory quickly started doing the rounds that maybe, just maybe, Rose was actually both a victim and a victimizer, having been hypnotized herself to help further her family's plan. But that theory actually graduated to quasi-confirmation when the film's deleted scenes were released, one of which sees Chris talking about being hypnotized by Rose's mother Missy. Rose replies that her mother also hypnotized her in high school to help her get over her stage fright, and that she similarly had the craziest nightmares. The wider implication, though, is that Rose was herself being manipulated by her family to help bring black men home and hijack their bodies for their nefarious purposes. While deleted scenes aren't technically canon, and you can argue that Peele was sensible to cut the scene in order to streamline the social commentary, it does lend a greater dimension to Rose as a character. After all, considering how convincingly frantic she was while searching for the car keys, could that not have been a flash of Rose's true instincts briefly bubbling to the surface? Maybe.